Welcome to this explainer. If you're diving into tort law, you know that certain cases are just, well, they're the absolute bedrock of our whole legal system. Because we operate in a common law system, the precedents set hundreds of years ago literally serve as the fundamental building blocks for the rights we exercise today. So today, we're going to break down a foundational 1845 tort law case that still dictates the exact boundaries of your legal rights. We're looking at Byrd v. Jones, which is just a fascinating case that perfectly illustrates the precise definition of false imprisonment.
Okay, let's jump right into a really simple but honestly deeply fascinating question that completely changed how the legal system views false imprisonment. Can you be legally trapped if the door behind you is wide open? I mean, it sounds like a total paradox, right? How can you possibly claim to be imprisoned if you have a perfectly viable escape route just sitting right there? But this exact scenario is what courts have to grapple with when deciding if someone's personal liberty has actually been unlawfully violated. And to understand the answer, we have to travel back in time to see exactly where this legal boundary was first drawn.
Section 1. The Hammersmith Bridge Standoff. The facts of the case.
Picture this. Our story begins in London over a century and a half ago with a stubborn guy, a physical standoff, and a temporary fence. The year is 1845. The defendant, Jones, organizes a public event on a section of the Hammersmith Bridge. He charges an admission fee and puts up a temporary fence to keep non-payers out of the spectator area. Enter our plaintiff, Byrd. He decides he has every right to use the public highway, so he just attempts to walk straight through the enclosed section without paying the fee. Well, within minutes, the situation escalates. Jones's employees step in and physically block Byrd from proceeding forward. But here is the absolutely crucial factual detail for our legal analysis. Byrd wasn't actually detained or physically trapped by the employees in a confined space. He just couldn't move forward in the specific direction he wanted to go. His path backward, or frankly, any other route avoiding the enclosed area, was completely open. He was entirely free to retrace his steps and walk away at any moment.
Section 2. Defining the legal issue. The core question.
So, this physical standoff on a London bridge sets up the core legal issue that every first-year law student needs to untangle. The crucial point we are analyzing is this: does blocking a person from moving in one particular direction amount to false imprisonment, especially when they remain entirely free to leave by another route? Now, Byrd certainly thought so, which is exactly why he sued Jones. He felt his fundamental rights were violated by being blocked on a public path. But the real question is whether the law actually agrees with his definition of being imprisoned.
Section 3. The plaintiff versus defendant. The arguments.
Let's look at how these two men argued their fiercely opposing sides in court, because this brilliantly illustrates the underlying philosophical clash here. Byrd claimed his freedom of movement had been unlawfully restricted. In his mind, hey, he was on a public highway, and blocking his specifically chosen path forward was an indignity. He saw it as an infringement on his personal liberty sufficient to constitute false imprisonment. He fundamentally believed he had the right to go exactly where he wanted to go. Jones, on the other hand, relied on a much more literal interpretation of confinement. Jones argued that Byrd was never actually confined to a specific space. Since Byrd could have just turned around and left the bridge whenever he wished, there was no actual, physical imprisonment. So, the court had to weigh these two perspectives and decide which interpretation of imprisonment was legally correct.
Section 4. The ratio decidendi. The core legal reasoning.
The precise legal rationale for the ruling, the ratio decidendi, is super interesting. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the defendant, Jones, and laid down the law stating that true false imprisonment requires the complete restraint of a person's freedom of movement. It is not merely preventing them from traveling in one specific direction. I want you to think about the gravity of the word complete here. The court decided that if you're merely prevented from going forward, but you remain absolutely free to leave by another route, the essential element of complete confinement is simply missing. And without complete confinement, there is no false imprisonment. The boundary of your liberty hasn't been completely erased. It's just been temporarily redirected.
Section 5. Partial versus total restraint. The rule.
The court's decision builds into a broader legal rule that distinguishes two very different types of physical restraint. And for law students, this is the massive takeaway. The law draws a really strict boundary between partial and total restraint. Partial restraint, exactly like what happened to Byrd, is merely being prevented from traveling in one direction while alternative escape routes remain fully available to you. Total restraint, on the other hand, means being completely confined to a boundary or a space with absolutely no alternative means of escape. The court established that a complete, total restraint of liberty is an absolute requirement for a false imprisonment claim to actually succeed.
So, in plain English, partial restriction does not equal false imprisonment. If a person is stopped from going forward but is completely free to turn around and walk away, they have not been falsely imprisoned under tort law. A mere obstruction in one direction, while certainly annoying and, yeah, perhaps inconvenient, is not actionable under this specific tort because it completely lacks the required element of total confinement.
Section 6. The lasting legal impact. The application. So why does a random bridge dispute from 1845 remain a foundational authority in modern common law courts? Well, it matters today because of the highly logical line it draws. Byrd v. Jones continues to guide courts by strictly defining the boundaries of the tort of false imprisonment, cleanly distinguishing partial obstruction from total confinement. But most importantly, it strikes a necessary balance regarding public policy. It protects your personal liberty, absolutely, but it remains legally realistic about what it means to live in a society with other people. Imagine if every single restriction of your movement, or every minor inconvenience that blocked your path forward on a sidewalk, gave you the right to sue for false imprisonment. The courts would be completely overwhelmed. The law establishes that not every obstruction is a lawsuit.
Let's bring this home. Think about how this 1845 logic applies to you right now. If you're in a room where someone maliciously blocks the only exit door, but right next to you is a safe, completely open first-floor window that you can easily climb out of, are you falsely imprisoned? Is your liberty totally restrained, or just partially? Based on the ratio decidendi of Byrd v. Jones, if you have a viable alternative route to leave, you aren't completely confined. It really makes you rethink the whole definition of being trapped, doesn't it? Keep that legal distinction in mind the next time your path forward is blocked.